You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. As more and more of our sexual communication has moved online, researchers have become increasingly interested in the topic of sexting. However, surprisingly little of this research has distinguished between solicited and unsolicited sexting. But there's a huge difference between these things. I mean, if you ask someone if they want to see a nude photo of you and they say yes, that's completely different from just sending a nude photo totally out of the blue. One of these things is not like the other. So let's talk about it. In today's show, we're going to dive into the topic of unsolicited dick pics. We're going to discuss how many men have ever sent one, why they often send these pics without asking first, how unsolicited dick pics are perceived by recipients, as well as what you need to know about sexting if you really want to connect with someone. I am joined today by Corey Peterson and Amanda Champion. Dr. Corey Peterson is the lab director and principal investigator of the Observations and Research in Gender and Sexuality Matters Lab, known as the Orgasm Lab, which is a great acronym, by the way. She also teaches human sexuality courses at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. Amanda Champion is a doctoral student in the Department of Criminology at Simon Fraser University and a faculty member in the Department of Psychology at Kwantlen Polytechnic. Corey and Amanda are the perfect guests to have on this episode because they've actually studied the science of dick pics and have some really fascinating insights to share on the topic. So let's get into it. Hi, Corey and Amanda, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, Justin. Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure to have both of you here. So is it safe to say that everyone here has received an unsolicited dick pic before? I mean, raise your hand if you've received one.
Yep.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. So tell me a story about a time when you received an unsolicited dick pic. What was that experience like for you?
Well, here's an interesting story. When we published our first research study on unsolicited genital image sending, it was published in the Journal of Sex Research, and we had quite a team of research assistants on that project. Anyways, it was well received, and we were at the Society for the Scientific Study of Sexuality conference in Denver later that year, and we're having lunch, myself and my lab members, and one of the co-authors on this study, right during lunch, received a dick pic at the table from someone who she was loosely seeing at her institution. This shocked us all. We're like, this just came out of nowhere. It's the middle of the afternoon. It's not as though they were engaged in any kind of sexting at that time, and it just came out of nowhere. Well, to her credit, her response was wonderful. She didn't address the dick pic. She didn't reply to the dick pic. All she did was send an attachment of our research study
I love that.
as a response.
What about you, Amanda?
Yeah, so kind of similar. We have published that study in the Journal of Sex Research, and it was generating a lot of comments from people. And we have a Google Drive as well as an email. So we were receiving a lot of emails about, the study. And then all of a sudden in our Gmail box, we get this image out of nowhere, a dick pic image. And we were all kind of shocked and we're like, how should we respond? And so as a lab, we were going through at first, some people are like labeling it as sexual harassment, which it is. Others were trying to have some fun with it. And we're like, how do we respond to this? Oh, should we signify that, the guy in the image is wearing a dirty sweatshirt, this hoodie? And we all kind of had a laugh about it and didn't end up responding, actually. So we didn't want to engage and facilitate more.
Yeah, it seems like dick pic researchers get a disproportionate amount of dick pics. So I had a colleague who was trying to do a study several years ago on men who send dick pics and why they do it. And when she put the call for participants out there, she ended up just getting inundated with dick pics, right? And that wasn't what she was looking for. She was wanting to study the psychology behind this. And so she actually had to shut down the study of dick pics because she got too many dick pics.
That's right. That's right.
I've also received quite a few myself. Thinking about an interesting example before the show. During the COVID pandemic, there was something interesting happening. So during that lockdown period, when we weren't able to leave our houses and everybody's normal daily lives were disrupted, I noticed one day, like I opened up my social media DMs and there was a dick pic. And that was the first of many of like this deluge of COVID dick pics that came through. And I wasn't on dating apps. I wasn't looking for this. They just started showing up in my DMs. And, my sex researcher brain was like, there is something interesting going on in the world right now. I think, a lot of people were bored and horny. And that's
Yeah.
probably what the motivation was behind a lot of this. I don't necessarily assume that there's always ill intent behind when somebody sends a photo like this. But
Yeah.
yeah, that was just an interesting experience
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
myself.
Absolutely.
Oh, boy.
It's interesting because when I was doing my undergrad at Kwantlen in psychology, I did receive one, before I finished my designation. And I responded with a kind of vegetable medley. I had a carrot and two kind of tomatoes beside it, and that was my response.
That was an actual vegetable medley.
An actual vegetable medley to this dick pic. I'm like, just trying to have fun with it. But now I understand kind of a little bit more of the complexities around it. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of ways to respond to it, which we can talk about later. And some people respond with humor. Other people respond in various ways. Some people don't respond at all. I don't know that there's any necessarily right or wrong
That's true.
response or reaction. It's up to the individual, how it's perceived, what feels right for them. But I know you've studied the science of dick pics and you've asked people about their own experiences. Do you have any stories from participants that you want to share?
Yeah. Well, we did have an open-ended section of our study, and that allowed people to get into their personal experiences. And one was kind of interesting that it was meant for someone else. The unsolicited genital image was meant for someone else, and they accidentally sent it to their work WhatsApp group chat
Yeah.
Whoops.
by accident.
Yeah.
So it was, for them, it seemed like more of an embarrassing kind of story.
Yeah.
But then we have other stories from receivers that talked about blocking the sender or, stating that they didn't appreciate it, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And, that also highlights the fact that when people are sending dick pics, sometimes they do get sent to the wrong person. And so I know there's often this assumption that we want to say there's, a certain intent behind it, but sometimes it is totally accidental, goes to the wrong place.
Yeah. This
Yeah.
dick pic sender was mortified
Yeah.
that this was now out there on the work. His colleagues had all received this image and mortified by that. Right?
Yeah.
So you got to be very careful. Pay attention.
Yeah. Double check who the recipient is
Yeah.
before you
Absolutely.
hit send. All right. So I know you've conducted some research on the topic of dick pics, and I know you published a study a few years back in the Journal of Sex Research, but that you also have some brand new data.
Mhm.
But take us back to the beginning for a moment. How did you initially get interested in studying this topic? So why study unsolicited dick pics?
That's a great question. Well, we're always looking for something interesting to research. And the way that our lab is organized is primarily comprised of undergraduate students with a handful, a smattering of some graduate students, because Kwantlen Polytechnic is an undergraduate institution. So what I like to do as the director, and Amanda as the co-director, is really put the topics, as long as they're sex and gender related, in the hands of the research assistants. What do they want to study? And of course, these are undergraduate students, they're young, and they're receiving these kinds of unsolicited images all the time. And so they selected the topic, like, let's do this. And so we did a big deep dive on what had been done on dick pic sending, and had found that there was some stuff, it's interesting for everyone. There had been some stuff, but no large scale quantitative types of analyses, and certainly nothing related to why. There had been, again, a number of theories, some theorizing around why people send dick pics, and sort of the general consensus was that it's a cost benefit analysis. There is, but the assumption being for the sender that there's little risk and the potential of some benefit if it goes the way you want. And so this cost benefit analysis was sort of the guiding theory, but no one had really asked.
Yeah.
Right? Let's ask. And so that's exactly what we set out to do is we recruited a sample fairly large, over 1,000 straight men, intentionally selected straight men, because we know that straight men may have very different motives and very different intentions than gay men, and that the culture of dick pic sending among gay men may be very different. So we narrowed it down to straight men. And we asked, have you ever sent a dick pic before? And we were clear to define unsolicited dick pic when we explained what unsolicited meant, just in case people didn't know. And then went on to ask, what are all the reasons from this list that you would have sent them? And perhaps as equally important, what were you hoping to, what was your intent? What was the response you were hoping to elicit in the receiver of the dick pic? In that study too, we also had some interesting questionnaires. We asked, had them fill out survey questionnaires about narcissism, about hostile sexism, benevolent sexism, those types of things. Because again, the sort of predominating ideas were that these men hate women. And this is a way to sort of demonstrate their disdain or their dislike. And so we wanted to look at that as well. So that was sort of the guiding thing. And there wasn't really anything out there that had investigated those specific topics.
Yeah, before you had published that paper, I had actually done a small study on this.
You had.
And I presented it at the Society for the Scientific Study of Sexuality conference and wrote about it on my blog, but I never got around to publishing it in a formal academic journal. So I'm glad that you guys came along because that data has just been in limbo. But it largely matches up with a lot of the things that you found, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But tell us a little bit about this new study. So why did you decide to revisit this topic, and what's the story behind the new study?
Well, so this was 2019 when we did the original study. In the interim, we had done a somewhat of a follow-up on receivers. And so that study was entirely women, receivers of dick pics, and what their reactions to receiving were. But nothing since those two studies were done. And then we were approached by Manscaped, which we thought was, honestly, I thought it was a scam. I thought the email was spam. I was going to delete it. Then I reached out to my lab members. I'm like, do you think this is a scam? You never know these days, right? And they're like, well, why don't you just inquire? So I thought, okay, that's a great idea. So I did email back and, yes, this is interesting. And it was real. And so Manscaped said, let's continue with this research that you've done in the past, and let's kind of look at this again and see has there been any changes, and we want to kind of investigate what else people might do besides the sending of dick pics that would establish a connection. And so we were very excited to get on board with Manscaped, particularly because we introduced a different element to the study, and that of selfie sending, and to see if selfie sending, which is, again, exceptionally common, it garners the same kind of reactions.
Right.
And that was our sort of basic intention behind this new study.
Yeah. I can relate, as a sex researcher, not always being able to differentiate the emails that I get that are legit and those that aren't, because they're all about sex. My inbox is an interesting place. Half of the messages I have a subject line that says orgasm or porn or even dick pics sometimes. So you never know.
You never know.
That's
no,
right.
You never know.
That's right.
All right. So for the new study, how many people did you survey? Who took part in this study?
We had 1,000 participants for this study. 500 of them were men, identified as male, actually, and 500 as female.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is sort of an amalgamation of the two separate studies that we did before. So the sort of dick pic study had all men, and the other study that we did that was published in the Journal of Sexuality and Social Policy was all women. And so this was a combined male and female sample.
And you also had people of different orientations too. So you were also able to look a little bit at what are some of the different reactions. For example, if a gay man gets a dick pic versus a heterosexual woman, those can be different things.
Yes,
sometimes.
absolutely. Yes, yeah. Absolutely. We did. We all sexual orientations, and we asked about age and basic demographics.
All right. So how many men say they've ever sent an unsolicited dick pic before, and how many people say that they've received one?
Well, this is interesting.
This is interesting.
Because I call it the older study that we originally published, it was nearly 50%. But in the new data that we gathered from Manscaped, it was 25%.
Who say they've sent an unsolicited dick pic?
An unsolicited dick pic. So it's interesting to see that difference between the data that's coming out.
Yeah, and that does make you wonder maybe if norms around sending nude photos online have changed.
Yeah. That's exactly what Corey and I have been talking about.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping. Interestingly, in the original study, the dick pic senders were statistically significantly younger than the non-senders. In this new study, the dick pic senders were older than the non-senders. And so it may be the same cohort.
Yeah,
We don't know.
That's an interesting point. And, there are some generational differences in sexual attitudes. And we've seen some emerging data about younger adults today and how they feel about sex and so forth. And they're having less sex than generations past. And so maybe they're also sending fewer dick pics and other things like that. But yeah, that would be a fascinating topic for a future study.
For sure.
So how many people say they've received an unsolicited dick pic?
Again, this is interesting. So approximately 25% said they sent, but approximately 50% said they received.
Yep.
So,
and that matched our other study on just the women.
yeah, it was, again, 50% who said they'd received. So those numbers match. So here we have an interesting dichotomy. More people are saying they're receiving than people are saying that they're sending. So somebody's not telling the truth.
There's some interesting math there.
That's interesting math.
It reminds me of a conversation I was having on the show recently where we were talking about gender differences in number of sexual partners that people report. And men on average report having about twice as many sexual partners as women. And, the math isn't
with whom,
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a different kind of math where it's just something about it isn't quite adding up. Maybe it's just a small percentage of men who are sending out a huge number of dick pics. And that might account for why there's such a big discrepancy there. I think for a lot of guys, sending dick pics is kind of a low effort strategy. Like it doesn't require a whole lot to, put that out there in the world. And so yeah, you don't need a lot of guys who are sending dick pics in order for, half of the female population to say they've received one.
Yes, for sure.
So where are guys typically sending these unsolicited nudes? Is it on dating apps, social media, somewhere else? Where does this happen most often?
I think we had a list of about 15 different platforms. And then there was obviously a section where they could enter other forms if they weren't listed. And it was select all that apply. And the top 3 were via text message or Tinder or Snapchat.
Snapchat.
Yeah.
So it's a mix of, texting, social media, dating apps. Dick pics are ubiquitous.
Yeah.
If you're online, people might send them anywhere.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So let's talk about the big question here, which is why do so many guys send unsolicited nudes? So what are the most common motivations for sending one of these photos in the first place? And, what kind of reaction are they hoping to get on the part of the person who receives that nude photo?
The data we found in the original study very closely matches what we found in this follow-up study. So it was a very consistent match. And the most commonly endorsed reason for sending dick pics were what we termed a transactional mindset. So this mindset of, if I send you one, then you'll send me one, right? Or if I send you one, then perhaps you'll want to have sex with me. So some kind of transaction. And we found that across both studies very consistently. The second most commonly endorsed reason, again, very consistent with the original study, was this, what we called partner hunting. So this idea that sending dick pics is a normal way of flirting, sending dick pics is the way that I express my sexual interest in someone, sending dick pics is how I convey that I want to have a sexual connection with someone or that I find someone attractive. Those are the most commonly endorsed. Very much lower on the list were the things that I had earlier said were the assumed reasons.
Right.
Things like, I don't like women. That was low on both studies. And things like, I get off on making people see images of my dick without their consent. Okay? So there was some endorsement of that, but it was not the primarily endorsed reason for the sending of these images.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I found in my own research when I studied this. And part of the reason that I wanted to look at it earlier was that, there were all these ideas out there on social media about why guys send unsolicited dick pics. And one of the big ones was that, well, this is just the new form of exhibitionism, right? And so traditionally, clinical exhibitionism is when a guy gets off on flashing his genitals to a stranger on the subway or, otherwise in a public setting. And what is arousing to an exhibitionist like that is the shocked reaction on the part of the observer. And so I wanted to test, are they sending these primarily for shock value and then they're kind of like getting off on that shocked response? And I didn't really find much in the way of support for that. That was pretty uncommon motivation. More often than not, it was guys saying, I'm hoping that they're going to like the photo and that they're going to send one in return, and like that this is going to then lead to a sexual or romantic relationship. And I didn't find a lot of support either for the idea that it's because they're misogynist or because they have these really negative attitudes toward women. Certainly some of them did, but that wasn't the overriding motivation. And so I think that's where we need to have, a nuanced discussion about unsolicited dick pics, because I think more often than not, the presumption is that there's this nefarious intent, that it's exhibitionism, that it's misogyny, but mostly it's people think it's a way of flirting. That doesn't make it right.
Yes, exactly.
Right? People do it. Yeah. Right. The morality or the social appropriateness of this is a different question. But looking at the motivations, it doesn't match up with the dominant narrative that you see people talking about on social media.
Agreed. And, in previous times that I've talked about the original study and here today, this study, I think is important. That's an important message that it seems that for, at least in our research, that the dick pic sender has misguided, but generally good intention. And to that point, we also asked participants, what kind of reaction were you hoping to elicit in the recipient of your dick pic? And overwhelmingly, they were positive. So the largest endorsement was sexual excitement. I want the recipient to feel sexually excited. I think attractive, valued. Yeah.
So these are very different from what you're explaining with the cyber flashers, which is, it seems like a lower proportion, very lower proportion. So they're hoping for people to feel valued, attracted.
Yeah, I mean, and we did give a list of others, shock, disgust, anger. Those were endorsed, but not overwhelmingly endorsed, right? The overwhelming endorsement was for these positive emotions. So it seems as though these senders are, again, misguided in their intentions. Their intentions are good, but their execution is poor.
Yeah. Now, I have a slight curveball question for you. I don't think you asked about this in your survey, but I wanted to get your take on this, which is whether you think there might ever be a kink motivation behind why some guys send unsolicited dick pics. And to explain what I mean here, you found that some guys say they're sending these pics because they're proud of their penis and they thrive on positive feedback and they want somebody to reply and say, what a great dick, or whatever, or wow, that's huge, right? But we know that there are some guys who get off on small penis humiliation, right? And so I was wondering if perhaps sometimes guys send these unsolicited pics because they actually want negative feedback about their penis.
You are spot on. So again, in the original study, we did ask that question. I thrive on insults. And we did get endorsement for that. It was small, but we did get endorsement for that.
But
no pun. We did ask that question. We also asked the question about, I would rather receive a negative response than no response. And 10% of participants endorsed that item, that they would rather get something negative, like who knows what they meant, what their thoughts are, like an insult to the penis, or you're an asshole, like who knows. Can I say asshole?
Oh, you can say whatever the fuck you want.
Awesome. Yes, so 10% said I'd rather get a negative reaction than no reaction at all. So I think.
But we possibly could unpack that further in a follow-up study, because that is a very interesting question, which I think garners like a little bit more deep of an exploration for sure.
Yeah. Oh, this is a fascinating topic. So we've talked about why guys send these pics and the reactions they're hoping for, but what actually happens when they send an unsolicited genital image? So let's start first with women. How often are they experiencing positive versus negative reactions to an unsolicited nude?
So we gave them a bunch of options to select for. And the top 3 were all negative responses. So when you look at that, it's I think number 1 was feelings of disgust, feelings of shock, as well as
Devalued.
were number 3. So it's all the negative ones clustering at the top. And,
And it was 85 to 90%
90%.
endorsement for the negative
absolutely.
reactions.
And when you look at the positive ones, they're all clustered near the bottom.
Yeah.
So it's a small proportion of women who are feeling valued or feeling turned on by these things. So
or sexually desirable.
exactly. Yeah.
So isn't this an interesting finding that we have this very stark mismatch between what the intended, what the intention was behind the sending of the dick pic and the actual reaction to the receipt of the dick pic. And that's sort of, I think, one of we like to call our hero findings, that there is this very big inconsistency between these two groups of people.
Yeah, so that intention versus what the actual reaction is on the part of the recipient seem to be very disconnected. Men are saying, like, when they send these pics that they want to feel attractive and valued and turned on, but the receivers are just, not feeling those reactions that, would line up with the expectation. So why is that the case? Why is the intent not lining up with the reaction? Why is there such a big discrepancy in what the intention is versus how it's actually perceived?
I think part of what explains this discrepancy, and that's a great question that I don't know that I fully have the answer to, but I think part of it is the consent issue, right? I think it relates to the fact that in many cases, in all cases in our study, because we asked about unsolicited dick pic sending, in all of these cases, these were not requested. These were sent without the person's consent, and this, for many individuals who receive these, can be interpreted as sexual harassment. And indeed, in our original study that we did just with women, that's how they reported it, right? A great majority of them indicated that they felt that the receipt of unsolicited dick pics were sexual harassment. It was sexually harassing behavior. And so I think that's what's happening here with this discrepancy, is this absence of consent.
Yeah, and I think, too, another issue that is at play here is that a lot of men are misreading the other person's cues, right? So we know that heterosexual men tend to over-perceive women's
sexual interest
in them, right? And so they might read more into someone, saying nice things and say, well, they're being nice to me. That means they want to sleep with me. Let's send them a nude or something. And so I think part of it, too, is that there's also just kind of this shock factor because the partners were just on totally different wavelengths where, the guy thought that this was going one place, but the woman he was talking to was like, I didn't express any romantic or sexual interest in him. And where did this dick
Where
pic
did it come
from?
from? Yes. And where did you get that from? That sort of reaction. Yeah.
So what about the men in your study who had received unsolicited dick pics? How were their reactions similar or different to women who had received unsolicited dick pics?
Surprisingly, not that different.
Wow.
The main difference that we found is, again, the top 2 reactions were negative. The third top reaction was indifference. And that's not what we saw amongst the women, right? It was, the top 3 were all negative. But for men, indifference was one of the top 3. And so their indifference is, whatever, I don't really care, that kind of reaction. But the bottom, again, lowest endorsed, were positive responses that were very similar. I think the only difference was sexually desirable was one of the lowest endorsed items for the men and not for the women. But otherwise, very consistent.
That's interesting because my colleague Amanda Gesselman at the Kinsey Institute has also published some research on dick pics and what people's reactions are. And she looked at differences between men and women of different sexual orientations. I think she found that lesbians were the least likely to like unsolicited dick pics, which I think kind of makes sense for various reasons. But she actually found in her research that gay men tended to have much more favorable reactions to unsolicited dick pics than women did. But that was a study that was a few years ago. And it goes back to, are the norms around this changing, right? Where even the way that gay men are perceiving unsolicited dick pics, is that different now than it was just a few years ago? And I think again, we could have a much broader, bigger conversation about just how norms and consent and all of these other things and the conversations we're having around them are evolving. But yeah, it's interesting to see these differences. It could just be differences in samples, but it might point to bigger trends that are going on in our culture around
Yeah,
sex.
agreed. Yeah.
And with our data for Manscaped, predominantly like 85% were straight. So I think if we would have to do an additional subcategory analysis too to
Yeah.
tease things apart further. Yeah.
You know, something I've wanted to do, I've wanted to revisit my dick pic research because I think there are lots of other interesting questions that could be asked in terms of, are there any characteristics of dick pics, whether they're solicited or unsolicited, that lead to more or less favorable responses? Like, so for example, does it matter if the penis is flaccid versus erect? Also, do the quality or characteristics of the photo matter? Like you mentioned something about like somebody with a dirty
sweater. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so does that make it even worse if it's a poor quality dick pic?
This is wonderful. Do you have that in your research? Like, did you ask questions about whether the dick pic was flaccid or erect, or did you ask that? Or is this like a whole new study that's got to be launched?
I have a little bit of limited data on it, but hey, maybe we should collaborate on the next
Absolutely.
dick pic study because there's lots of questions we could ask here.
You know, we could even do it as an experimental design where some people get a flaccid and some people get an erect. Some
Mhm.
people get a dirty hoodie and some people get like a nice dress shirt and tie. Does that make a difference?
You know, in looking at some of the reactions from participants in your study, I remember reading one person who said, you know, I got the unsolicited pic and, you know, I was shocked and it wasn't even big, which made it even worse, right? Which suggests that like people might be more okay with certain dick pics if they would at least line up with their turn-ons. Again, I'm not saying that it's okay to send unsolicited ones, but
yeah, but if they
there's-
lined up with their turn-ons, are they represented what they think the best looking dick should be?
If there's effort put in, put in.
The dirty hoodie threw
Come
us
on.
all. You know?
So let's take it out of the unsolicited realm for a minute. Are there any qualities or characteristics that you think make for a good dick pic?
Yes, I think a good dick pic is a groomed dick pic.
Yeah,
Right. So
absolutely.
this is a dick pic that's nicely presented.
There's effort. There's
Yeah,
effort.
it's groomed, snipped, clean. Size isn't really a thing for me. I don't care. I personally would prefer one that's erect. I like the look of an erect dick over a flaccid one. I'd love to see what other people think about this. This is me, and no dirty hoodies.
Yeah.
It's just just the dick itself. I actually think it would be kind of hot if there's a hand on it. You know, I kind of find that hot. What about you?
I agree with all of those things. Effort is huge. So grooming is a big thing. Erect penis would be best. And you know, even some other aspects of their body in the image, like abs,
Oh yeah,
legs, something like
Let's
that.
see some abs.
Like not just that one part.
Yeah. The nice hip where you get the hip
Yes,
bone.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'd be down for that.
You know, I think good dick pics too also depends on lighting. Like you need good lighting.
Absolutely.
You don't want it to be blurry. You need to think about what's in the background.
Oh my
right?
goodness. No
Right.
toilets.
Right?
No bathroom shots.
Yeah. Especially not in like a public restaurant.
Exactly.
You know? It's like there's a lot of things to take into consideration here.
Yeah.
when-
Also, when you're on the date, you don't want to be going, is that my bathroom?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Are they in my bathroom? What's going on here? They take that in my bathroom? Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I think
Good
the way a
lighting.
lot of guys approach dick pics though is that they just like pull their pants down, just like snap a photo really quickly. But if you put a little bit of effort into it, think about some of these other
Yes.
things, you could potentially get a more positive reaction. And again, I'm not talking about unsolicited, just talking about dick pics in general. There's things to think about there. That's a separate follow-up study.
Yeah.
You know, also some people prefer to see like the penis behind, say, some gray sweatpants, right? So they don't necessarily even want to see the full thing. Like, so yeah, let's do another study too, where we say, what is the ideal dick pic?
I love
for you?
that.
Like
I'm
almost
surprised-
like a tease, right? With the pants. A little bit of a tease would be nice too.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
All right. So this is going to consume
I
us for the
know.
rest of our careers. Yes. All right. So something else you asked people about on the survey was how they felt about sending and receiving selfies.
Mhm.
So how did people feel about sending and receiving those kinds of photos in general? Do they enjoy sending selfies, receiving them?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was on a 5-point scale. Did we have?
5-point scale.
And receiving was quite high. It was 4 out of 5. A lot of people enjoyed receiving. Sending as well was quite high. Kind of more middle of the road, three-ish out
Yeah.
of 5. So receiving was quite high there. Yeah.
We figured the discrepancy between sending and receiving is related to modesty. People being
Mhm.
like, I kind of like sending. I don't want to be too immodest. We don't know. But yeah, there was overwhelming. There was a slight difference, a sex difference, not statistically significant sex
Mhm.
difference, but nonetheless, males were more interested and reported more enjoyment, in receiving, and females reported more enjoyment in sending.
Mm-hmm. I gotta say, I don't really enjoy sending selfies that much because I just have to take so many of them to get the right one that I want to send.
Right
But
angle.
I know
Yeah.
you got to do all the angles, and
I
again,
know.
it's a lot of the same qualities and characteristics of a good dick pic
Right.
are also in a good selfie,
Absolutely.
where you're paying attention to lighting and framing and what's in your background.
Yes.
So for me to send one selfie, it's like I got to take
It's a lot of
100
work.
pictures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want the
So much
double
work.
chin.
Oh, I know. You got to have it
You
taken
gotta be up.
facing, the camera above you. You can't do it from below.
No.
No.
No double chins.
No.
So how is sending or receiving a face pic perceived compared to receiving an unsolicited dick pic? Which one is more likely to generate a positive response?
That's a great question. Participants were asked about their enjoyment in receiving, but then they were given a follow-up question that asked them to consider 11 characteristics of the body and to rank those characteristics in order from the characteristic that would be most likely to generate a response to the least likely to generate a response.
So if you received a photo with just that characteristic, would you respond to it if it was feet or face or whatever?
Exactly. And we found overwhelmingly that the strongest endorsed characteristic was a face pic. So the face or features of the face. So a face pic, the eyes, the mouth. At 73%, so 73% of participants ranked this as the number one image that they would respond to. In contrast, only 8% of people selected the genitals as number one. So there is an overwhelming sort of endorsement for the receipt of face pics over dick pics.
They were actually 9 times
Yes.
more likely to respond to a face pic than a dick pic.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think that is? Why do people seem to respond so much more favorably to, hey, here's a face versus there's a dick?
Well, I think it in part has to do with, again, that the dick pic might be perceived as harassment.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it also has to do with our sort of evolution, right? And our tendency to be attracted to faces,
Yeah.
right? Faces provide a lot of social information. Faces, give us information about the person's intentions. I mean, you don't get that from a dick. Your assumption is that the dick pic is hostile. You
Dick
can't.
pics
Yeah.
tell you something
They do.
about intentions, whether it's flaccid or erect. Yes.
Exactly. So I do think it's sort of rooted in our evolution. We know from previous research that we have an evolutionary tendency to look at faces. Even babies look at faces. And so, we're social beings, and the face, the eyes, the mouth can tell us a lot about a person's intentions and motives, and whether they're friendly or whether they're foe. So I think that does also have a lot to do with it. And then I also think it's less of a threat in that
Mm-hmm.
sense, right? I mean, whereas the dick pic comes across as more of a threat for some, the face pic doesn't come off with that same kind of element of threat,
Yeah.
I think.
And a smile matters too.
Yes.
The smile matters a lot.
The smiles can say a lot.
Yes,
Yeah.
they can.
So, it's interesting that people are so much more receptive to a face pic than an unsolicited nude. Yet so many guys will send the unsolicited nude, but they're not so comfortable sending pics of their face, right? So that's an interesting question. Like, why is it easier sometimes for guys to send this nude photo of themselves as opposed to just sending a face pic?
I feel like the genital image is like
Dismembered
dismembered
the self.
Yeah.
It's an interesting term for that. But yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah, or removed
Yes.
from the self,
Yes.
perhaps.
Yeah. And the
right?
identification.
It's anonymous.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's totally about the anonymity when you're
Yes.
sending just a picture of your genitals, because it could be, you know, it's something they don't necessarily have to trace back to you.
That's
But,
right.
you know, that also goes back to another question I want to look at in future research in this area, which is when guys say they're sending dick pics, are they always sending their own?
I know.
Or
right?
are they sending someone else's or pics that they might find on the internet? You know, maybe sometimes if a guy isn't totally comfortable with his size, he'll find a photo online that looks similar, but it's a little bigger. And so maybe he'll send that.
That's a good question.
Yeah. So are the dick pics even their own
Yeah.
that they're sending?
That's
And
great.
Photoshop too.
Yeah,
Like,
Photoshop.
Everyone can use Photoshop now.
dick
Yeah.
pics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And filtered dick pics.
Filtered,
Yes.
yeah.
Mhm.
And
AI generated.
Yes. Jesus.
and you can also use those filters on the face too. So a lot of the
Oh, yeah.
face pics could be filtered as well.
That's
yeah,
true.
yeah.
Another
Beautified.
interesting finding was we also asked the participants about which characteristics, again, the same characteristics, would you most likely respond? No, that was
We asked them which ones you would think would get a response.
So that's right. So if you were the sender, what do you think people would be most likely to respond to?
It's the same thing. It's 8 times more likely with the face pic than genital or butt pic.
Yeah, 8 times more likely to respond to the face. Now, what's interesting about this is that people said this. I think that others would be more likely to respond to face pics. Well, then if they know this,
Why are you sending the genital pic?
right? So people seem to know that face pics will garner a positive response. So I think the take-home message here is to send the face pic. At the end of the day, that's your better, your better behavior, the better outcome for you.
Yeah, you know, this also has me thinking about another layer of complexity to this, which is the things that different guys might feel insecure about. And I think some people might feel more confident in their penis, less so in their face. And so they might rely more on the dick pic. I think too that sometimes people send out the dick pics just because they're easy and they know that, you know, face pics are preferred, but they know that even if there's just a small percentage of people who are going to respond favorably to the unsolicited dick pic, that if you send it out in a high enough frequency, it still quote unquote works for them in the sense of meeting their goals in terms of having somebody who reciprocates or wants to be sexual with them. So I think of it as, you know, for some guys, they see it as a low risk, high reward strategy, because even though it doesn't pay off a lot of the time,
it
just
only
needs
has to pay off once.
Yeah.
Once or twice. Yeah, for sure. All right. I think that's what perpetuates it. I also think too that perhaps for some, if you get rejected on a face pic, there's a more personal,
Absolutely,
than if you get rejected on a dick pic that's anonymous. I mean, there's no lineups for dick pics. There's nobody's identifying you in a dick pic lineup. But in a face pic, maybe there's that sense of loss of self-esteem,
because that's what the world sees, right?
because that's what the world sees. That's what everybody sees. Yeah.
So what should we do with all of this? You know, what should we take away from these findings? So for guys who are thinking about sending a dick pic, what questions do you want them to ask themselves first before uploading and hitting send?
Ooh, I guess consent would be first one on my list.
Number
right?
one. Number one. Do you have consent?
Yeah, because by and large, we found 80 to 90% were from strangers or people that they literally just met.
Yeah. We asked,
So
when you have received a dick pic, who's it been from? And that was exactly right. 85% of people said it was from a stranger or someone they had literally just met.
Yeah. So that's another contextual factor that people can kind of be like, okay, does this person know me? Are they consenting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's got to be the number one question.
Yeah. Consent.
Yeah, it's a really important piece. And I guess the question is, how do you ask somebody if they want to receive a dick pic? I mean, could you say, are you interested in seeing some spicy photos?
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love that. That is a beautiful way to ask the question. And if the person goes, huh? What do you mean?
You're like, maybe I'll
Maybe-
clarify.
Be a little more explicit. But I think that's a very nice, gentle, respectful way to ask that question.
Yeah. And to be clear, we're not saying like guys should never send dick pics or nudes,
No,
right?
no,
As long as
absolutely
they
not.
ask first and the recipient's on board with it, it's all good as long as it's mutually consensual, right?
Totally agree.
Absolutely.
100%. I mean, there's a place for them,
Mhm.
right? There's a place for them in our relationships and a place for them in sexting and getting to know someone. Absolutely. But yeah, it's really very much about, is this something that the other person would want to see?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the question you need to ask. And if you don't know for sure, then you ask.
All right. So we're running short on time, but I have one last question for you, which is what do you want people to know about, I guess, what I would call quote unquote safe sexting and how to cultivate healthy relationships and connections in digital spaces?
Well, I think it's important that to cultivate healthy relationships in digital spaces, people do need to clarify the consent aspect. I think it's important that one of the sort of takeaway messages, I think, from our study with Manscaped is that, you know, if a face pic works, maybe start with that. You know, start with a Facebook.
Start with the face,
Yeah,
not the nudes.
That's right.
Yeah.
You want to form a connection with somebody by our participants' own words. You know, face pics are what they think is going to get a response. And so I think it's a good idea to start there, start with a face pic and then move up to, or down, pardon me, move down from there.
Yeah.
Anything else?
And once that consent is established, put some effort in.
Yeah.
Have a little bit of grooming. Same with the face too.
Yeah,
we know from the research, even with face research, that a well-groomed beard is more likely to score higher on attractiveness,
Trustworthiness.
protection.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Safety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Safety.
You want the curtains to match the drapes.
That's
right?
Yes.
Yes.
That's right. That's right.
Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Corey and Amanda. It was a pleasure to have you both here. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work?
Absolutely. We have a website. We're at www.orgasmresearchlab.com.
Mhm.
You can find us there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're working on a publication with our Manscaped findings, so that will be upcoming soon.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure to post about that on our website, as
website,
well.
yeah.
And I'll be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. And I think we have lots of great ideas for future research collaborations.
Absolutely.
Yes. It's exciting.
It is very exciting.
Well, thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here. Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a subscriber of Sex and Psychology Premium to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Laymiller and Instagram at Justin J. Laymiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.